I want to welcome you to our teaching. I'm Bishop Henry Luke Orombi, and today I want to address the theme of giving to God. Giving to God. And I want to read from 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 7 to 24. 1 Kings 17, verses 7 to 24. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat of it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word the Lord had spoken by Elijah. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy on this widow I'm staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." It's a very deep reading and a very concise experience of the prophet and this widow. Giving in the Bible is expression of our faith, our love, our worship to God. We give because God is a giver. We learn to give because we live with people who need us and need what we have. And so when we give to each other, we are giving because God has taught us to give by example. The giver and the owner of everything is God. Now let me look at some examples of people who have really given to God and gave to God with a very deep devotion. Number one person who ranks high in this great teaching on giving is Abraham himself. Abraham, God asked him to give his son. And Abraham would not hesitate to give his son. When you read Genesis chapter 22 and verse 2, we are confronting a man whose faith and obedience is so deep, is so high, is so committed that he gave. Look at verse 2 and 3. Chapter 22, verses 2 and 3. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up, loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. What a very committed, faithful, obedient man of God. God is asking Abraham to give a son, the only son, which is amazing, the only son. That should remind you. For God so loved that he gave his only son. In Isaac, you are looking at the picture of Christ, the only son of God. The only son you have, but you know that Abraham had also Ishmael. But Ishmael didn't come from Sarah, his wife, official wife. Ishmael came from Hagar, the maid to Sarah, an Egyptian. But God is asking for the original son who is going to be the heir. And this is a question which is very hard. I mean, you and I, faced with this circumstance and scenario, it will not be easy. Your only son. Give it to me, not just give it to me as a sacrifice so that he lives for me, but go and kill the son as a burnt offering. But early the next morning, Abraham got up, loaded his donkey, he took with him his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. He's not going to be mincing about, he's not going to be complaining. No, he got up in the morning and he went. Now that is Abraham. Let me say this. When he went and did what God promised, or what God commanded him, the blessing of God was pronounced upon him in a mega way. We might look at that at some point. But the second people who also gave to God, we are looking at the Israelites in the desert. In Exodus chapter 36, Exodus chapter 36, an account of giving that blows your mind, because God is asking our people who don't have access to everyday business to earn money. Look at verse 4 to 7, 36, 4 to 7. In verse 4, so all the skilled workers who were doing all the work on the sanctuary left what they were doing and said to Moses, the people are bringing more than enough for doing the work the Lord commanded to be done. The people are bringing more than enough for the work the Lord commanded to be done. What's happening here? Then Moses gave order, and they sent this word throughout the camp. No man or woman is to make anything else or an offering for the sanctuary. And so an offering for the sanctuary, and so the people were restrained from bringing more, because what they had already had was more than enough to do all the work. There in the desert, God commands Moses, construct a tabernacle, a place where I will come and meet you on a daily basis. And then the people were asked to bring materials for building a tabernacle. This is a tent, a big tent, where they're going to meet and worship God. You must remember, these people are in the desert. There is nowhere they can earn a living. All they have is what they came with from Egypt. You and I might think, but you see, we have a long journey to go. Why should I surrender? Not the Israelites. They brought, and they brought, and they brought, and they brought, until the builders said, no, Moses, stop them. Isn't this something very unique? Is this kind of an idea that we can reap from these people in the desert, or a place of scarcity, with their heart open to give to God? And if I am that kind of person who would give and give and give, God will bless and bless and bless me. This is the second example of a people willing to give. A third example is of David the king himself. David the king, you find him in Chronicles, the first Chronicle, chapter 29, and in verse 14, when you read what David is saying, it should humble you and me, because this is David, the king of Israel, prosperous, successful. But listen to this. In verse 14, David is speaking. He said these words, but who am I? But who am I? And who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? But who am I? And who are my people that we should give as generously as this? everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. That is a humbling statement of a man who knows his origin. He knew where he came from. He knew he was a shepherd boy out there, and even when Samuel was looking for a king, his father could not consider him to be anybody. He knew his background. Now, some of us forget. When we are successful, we are earning, we are eating, we have things around us, we forget where God got us from. They never ever forget where God got you from. Never ever forget the beginnings, because humble beginnings should teach us that what we build later on does not belong to us. David is very clear. David is saying everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. What you have received is what you give back. God doesn't ask you for what you don't have. You have a house. If God is asking that house to provide hospitality, offer that house. You have a vehicle. If God is asking you to transport this and that and the other, allow them to use it. You have got money. If God is asking for money for work so that you can send missionaries, or you can give to the building of facilities for Him, you give that thing, because God has given you in order to give freely. When you receive, it's freely you give. Now,